in your mind, how much do we have to hold to before we can sort of draw a line and exclude everyone beyond that? Because for some people, the gay marriage side of things would be a red line to where, okay,
Right.
that shows a certain view of scripture that's not acceptable, or other such issues, abortion, for example, being another one. So how would you define that line, if there is such a thing?
Yeah, I do. I think the Apostles' Creed is a really good place to start. It's probably the most ecumenical of the creeds. That it's like, well, this is the basic Christianity, right? Like this
Hmm.
is the basic stuff. I
Yeah.
think I hold to the first seven ecumenical councils, kind of. And what I mean by that is like I don't hold always to the anathemas that are in many of them, where it's like if you disagree with this, you're going to hell. But I hold to a lot of the same. So I pulled up a list. First Council of Nicaea, repudiating Arianism, and saying, Jesus Christ is fully God, fully man. Like the basic. If you can't do Council of Nicaea, I actually think you're not a Christian. That is
Yeah, I would
like the
agree.
most.
Yeah.
That's the most authoritative. Look, they hauled in all these elders and bishops who had just finished the Diocletian persecution. Some of them didn't have eyeballs, some of them didn't have hands. And they all gathered in a room and they said, Jesus Christ is the Son of the living God. And I believe them because they had faced martyrdom. And that's what they believed. Who am I to debate that? That's crazy, right? It's like these people faced the ultimate test and they all came into a room and say, no, Jesus is God. So it's like, all right, there we go.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good enough for me.
Yeah.
So, and then Constantinople, right? The second one that clear that Christ is born of the Father before all time, right? Yes.
Hmm.
The Council of Ephesus, that Mary is the mother of God, right?
Yeah.
That was one of the main things, and I hold firmly to that.
Yeah.
Man, there was a hot fire debate a
Yeah.
few weeks
The
ago
whole
about this.
Nestorianism kind of
The
debate.
Nestorianism, and it was like, and I didn't even know. I was like, I didn't even know. Honestly, people still did the Nestorian thing. I thought this was settled, but
Yeah.
it was like, no, Mary can't be the mother of God. She's the mother of Jesus. And I'm like, well,
Right.
but Jesus is
Christotokos or
God.
whatever they say. Yeah.
Yeah, the Theotokos, the God bearer, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, God can't have a mom. I'm like, I know. That's why the incarnation is crazy. That's the whole
Yeah.
miracle is that, yeah,
Yeah.
it is ridiculous that God has a mom, right? Because that is the miracle itself, is that God takes on flesh and lives among us, right? So that's actually the hypostatic union that Jesus is man and divine being reaffirmed. The Council of Chalcedon, monophysitism, we're not going to spend time on that, but I uphold that. Constantinople, and then really the last one here, the Second Council of Nicaea, the veneration of icons, right? Like I
Yeah.
actually
That's
do
the tricky
hold
one. Yeah.
I hold to the veneration. I think it's fine. I actually think they're very helpful. I just don't anathematize those who don't. Right? Like if you don't want an icon or you think that's idolatrous, I don't think you're going to hell. Like I don't have any problem with that. But often there is a push to unite around the seven because those are before what many Protestants would say were the medieval church's corruptions came
Hmm.
in, which
Yeah.
is where you start to get transubstantiation. You start to get the doctrine of the papacy, which was these kind of medieval kind of corruptions of what the early church was trying to do. And I hold to that Protestant position that's when so I tend to try to uphold the first seven and especially the first three or four. And if you really want to draw a red line, like a real red line, if you can't say the Apostles' Creed, you probably can't be a Christian. And even if you have problems with some of it, if you can't at least step out in faith and say it,
Yeah.
even if you don't necessarily, if it's not moving from here to here,
Hmm.
if you can just stand before somebody and say it in faith and say, God, help me to get here, I think that's good
Yeah.
enough. I think that's the true red line.
Yeah. Maybe that's, I don't know how some people would view this, but I would say that if you believe with your head most of the time, that I would say that's good enough. Like that's all you can do. If you can't, what I mean by that is there's a level of emotion that kind of gets romanticized
Sure.
sometimes. And sometimes
Yeah.
if you just believe it and know it and repeat it and, work on the other part, it will come usually eventually. But I would say, like what more can you do than try to believe and proclaim, what you understand. So, I would agree that at least there's a level of submission there to, I don't understand the Trinity most of the time.
Sure.
In fact, all the time. So
Yeah.
there's a level of just submitting to, and as the Anglicans
Submitting
would
in
say,
faith.
being okay with a level of mystery in your faith. So
Yes.
that's kind of like a first red line of even being like acknowledging they're a Christian. And I guess the second one would be who to be in a community with or in a denomination with. So this is where probably the second
Mm,
level issues come in. So that's
right.
where people will be like, I might not say you're going to hell for believing in, that. Well, some people would say that about pro-choice. So I won't use that example, but
Sure.
I'll say
Right.
like for ordaining female ministers and
Right.
pastors. Some people would say that's a big enough split to where I can choose to be in a different community than you. So would you agree with that, or would you say that that's kind of maybe too narrow of a view of who you can be in community with?
I'm pretty ecumenical. Probably more so than most of my colleagues. I am a big believer in the church unity movement. I would love to, I've talked about this many times. I dream that before the end of this century that all the mainline Protestants are in full communion with each other. Because if we're all full communion with each other, we're one church. We don't need one visible institution to be one church. Now, here's what I will say. Caveat. I do think Christ founded a invisible church and a visible church. I think Christ founded a visible institution, and that Methodists, Presbyterians, Anglicans all have a legitimate claim to that visible
Okay.
institution just as much as the Roman Catholics do, because we were kicked out.
Right.
we,
Right.
we were not trying to start our own churches. We were trying to reform the one church. And so I believe in the church visible, that Christ founded a visible church. Um, and I think that's an incredibly important part of the visible church is to be in unity as much as possible. So if we could have full communion agreements with each other, even if we don't merge, like legally merge, we would become one church. And that's what I hope. We're about to, the United Methodist Church, probably next year will come into full communion with the Episcopal Church. And that's a big deal because we'll be in full communion with the Anglicans again for the first time since our
Mhm.
founding 250 years
Yeah,
ago.
that is
And
huge.
that's a really good thing. And Jesus really likes that. And hopefully one day we can become in communion with Rome and with
Yeah.
Istanbul now, Constantinople, right? The
Yeah,
Eastern
sure.
Orthodox Church, right?
Yeah.
Um, that's the hope. I'm a big church unity person. I would like to see, if we can't be one visible institution, let us be one invisible one, in
Mhm.
a sense of like, I don't even know if we're doing that super well right now.
Yeah.
Where it's like we don't need to be one legal entity, but we could be one visible church by just full communion agreements. Because
Mhm.
who cares about secular law? The United Methodist Church incorporate. I obviously care about secular law,
Well,
but
yeah,
like
but yeah.
in terms of full communion, who cares if the United Methodist Church incorporated like to the Secretary of State, right? When we
Mhm.
register our organization, who cares if they're the same actual legal organization? What matters is the spiritual unity, and that's what a full communion agreement does.
Mhm.
We can interchange clergy when we're in full communion
Yeah.
with each other. I would even do it with Presbyterians, even though they're Calvinists. And I have no bigger beef on this planet than with Calvinists. So that's my largest
Yeah.
theological beef, and I would come into communion with them. I do not think that's a high enough issue,
Yeah. Well, that's
even though I
largely
really don't
that's
like it.
on the whole, that's kind of where I fall. I try to, I would sort of associate myself with the reform side
Yeah,
of things most of
that's
the
fine.
time. Not always, but most of the time. But I also, the thing that I don't like about the reformed community is not the Calvinism. I'm actually okay with most of that, most of the 5 points,
Sure.
most of the time. But my problem is more just a general, really what you're speaking to, like an exclusionary mindset of it.
Yeah,
Both sides make it out to be like a real deal breaker, the whole
sure.
soteriology thing. And I really think it doesn't matter that much. I think it's important because understanding God is important, but I really don't think,
Right.
personally, you might disagree, but I personally don't think that's a big enough issue to even, I would happily be in an Arminian affirming denomination. That wouldn't be probably enough for me to leave a
Sure.
church, but it would be a preference. But I don't think it should affect really anything about how you act to God, to other people. It's
Yeah,
really, what's the word? It's academic to a certain point.
sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to like the preaching in a Calvinist church, right? But if the sacraments are being duly administered the way that they ought to be since the earliest days of the church, if baptism is being done and the word is being rightly preached, then it's a church. And I'm going to have a serious disagreement if we're interchanging clergy.
Yeah.
And if they come and preach Calvinism in my church, I'm be like, okay, can we agree not we can be in full communion with each other, but can we agree to
Yeah.
set this one aside
Yeah,
when we're preaching?
you might not trust them on that topic.
Right. Can we agree to set this one aside when we're pulpit swapping or whatever it is that we're doing, right? Or wherever you are preaching, say we're in full communion and I'm serving a Presbyterian church. It's like I before I go there, I have to honor that that's what this church believes before I go and serve there, and vice versa, right? But yeah, I mean, soteriology is going to be a hard barrier for most full communion agreements
Yeah.
um, to cover. The Calvinist Arminian split's pretty heavy. Yeah,
Yeah. But again, I just like, to me it's not it, you can argue that it affects your view of God to a point that it taints really everything that
sure.
flows from that. Like, you could be sort of super Calvinist where, I'm, the elect and everyone else is damned, and aren't I?
Right.
Like, you could be that, or you could be the other side where you're like, well, God doesn't have any control in anything really, where it's totally up to us to, so if we can beat ourselves up if people don't, raise their hands after the service to accept salvation
Right.
because it was on us. So there's two extremes there, and obviously that, you've mentioned prevenient grace and that kind of stuff. So there's any Arminian affirming church that actually understands their own doctrine. I can be okay with that, because I think it's a valid point of view, but it's really a heart issue beyond that, because it's, you can let either side really taint your view of God if you're not careful. But I agree. I didn't used to consider myself particularly ecumenical. I think it would have been a very low importance issue in my life, to see churches working together. And I kind of thought it was, a fool's errand, because they split for a reason.
Sure.
There's good reasons for it. We should at least honor, the people's convictions. But, I want to see a time where, certainly at least seeing what Roman Catholics say about Protestants, it's definitely, they're getting closer to accepting them. But at the same time, there's such a barrier between people who I've become increasingly convinced are, in most cases, valid Christians that we can say, brothers in Christ too. But at the same time, that there's an exclusionary mindset to where there's such a forced list of things you have to believe in order to be, accepted by them. So I agree with you. I want to move towards that, and definitely want to have a, a bigger tent on a lot of these issues.
It's doing better than it was
Yeah.
even 20, 30 years ago. And
Yeah.
there's a part of me that wonders if that's what if God is up to something, and it, because I see hearts just kind of open to it, like in a
That
way
sounds
that
very
just
Calvinist of you to say that God's up to
yeah,
something.
God is up to some. Oh, we see, we Arminians, we believe God is very much at work, but we just believe people can say no to him, you know?
Mm, yeah.
And which is in its own way kind of sad, right? I think
Yeah.
Calvinism is even more sad, frankly, but it's also sad in a way that Arminians, you can say no.